Go ahead and go to Genesis 37 while I get set up. The joys of a mobile church. Things just take a little bit longer, but that's okay. All right. If I have not met you, my name is Nate. I'm one of the teachers here at Reunion Church. Glad that you guys are able to be here. As Chris mentioned at the start of worship, we are sitting at tables not because we're in a school, but because our formula is based around what we call table talks, where after I get done talking, you guys turn around and talk to each other about what I talked about. And we've got some leaders that kind of have some questions and things to guide you through and talk through some just different ideas. And really it's an open conversation, so you can kind of talk about whatever you want, but kind of helps to stay on topic. So it's a good idea. I am going to run really long today, so hopefully we have time for that, because we're going to go through a really big chapter of Genesis with a ton of stuff in it that I'm not even going to completely cover. So as a church, typically we go verse by verse through the Bible as we go through and studying God's Word. And currently we're in a series that we're calling the Patriarchs. We're going through Genesis, and we're talking about the different patriarchs that are in the book of Genesis. And currently where we're at right now, we are now on the final patriarch, which is Joseph. So we're going to begin Joseph's story today, which is in chapter 37. Joseph is the son of Jacob, who was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. We did Abraham, we did Jacob, and now we are on to Joseph. And there's a very high likelihood as I go through this and I talk about Joseph and I talk about Jacob that I will mix their names up. So much so that Joseph Morrison, who's in my discipleship group, there was an entire week where I called him Jacob the whole time, and I kept having to correct myself because it's hard for me. But anyway, I digress. We're going to jump right into it because we've got a lot to cover. So, if you're in Genesis 37, let's read verse 2. In verse 2 it says, "This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them." So, if you recall, Jacob has 4 wives at this point. He goes to marry Rachel, and then Rachel's dad tricks him into marrying Leah, and then he works to end up marrying Rachel finally, and then the two women have a rivalry on who can have the most kids, and then they end up giving him their servants, kind of like what Sarah did with Abraham, and so he collects 2 more concubines. So he has 4 wives at this point, and so all of his children are split over these 4 wives, and there's a rivalry that existed between the wives that now has carried on to the children. And in the original Hebrew here, the implication is that Joseph, he is an apprentice shepherd. He's learning how to be a shepherd from the older boys. And so Joseph is the youngest of the half-siblings, but he does have a full sibling brother who's a younger brother, Benjamin. And they're the only 2 sons of Rachel. And this common theme that you're going to see in Genesis is that whenever shepherds are mentioned, you end up with a story about division. It's kind of a weird concept. You see it in Cain and Abel, that Abel was a shepherd, and then there's division. We see it in Abraham and Lot, that their shepherds aren't getting along, and then there's division. We see it, there's a story about Isaac with the Philistines that's based around flocks and shepherds. We saw it with Jacob and Laban, and now we're going to see it here. And it's a clue to the reader that conflict is about to arise. And as you read through Genesis, if a shepherd comes up, your spidey sense should go off, and you should have that Star Wars moment. I've had a bad feeling about this, because something's about to go down. And there's really a lot of really interesting parallels and repetitions throughout the book of Genesis. We've only touched on a few in this series. One interesting one is there's the Eden story gets repeated constantly over and over in different ways through the book of Genesis. We don't have the time. We haven't taken the time to really break all that down because it gets into real nerd stuff and half you guys don't care. But it's just kind of a neat thing to look into. I recommend looking into it if you're interested in that. But so what we see here in this first couple of verses is that Joseph, he's out learning to be a shepherd with his brothers, and he's observing evil things that his brothers do when their father's not around. And then he goes back and he gives a full report to his father about what his brothers are doing. And this introduction immediately shows us Joseph's immaturity. We already know at this point that Leah's sons, they're not good dudes, right? There's a story of Reuben in chapter 35 where he disgraces his father, and we talked about Levi and Simeon and Shechem, where they deceived the entire town and slaughtered everybody. They're not great guys. And it's very likely that the reports that Joseph is giving to his father about his brothers, that they are actually true. He's likely not making this up. And I believe the suggestion here is that telling Jacob is the only thing that he did. He sees him do bad stuff, goes, tells dad. And he does that rather than actually speak with his brothers or confront them. He just goes straight to dad. He goes tattletale mode immediately. And thinking about this, there's times in our life when we will see someone we care about doing evil. And Jesus actually gives us step-by-step directions on how we can approach the situation in the book of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 15, it says, "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church, and if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector." So if they don't listen, Jesus isn't saying completely shun them, just so you guys know. It doesn't mean, but it does mean that we set boundaries and we keep a level of distance at that point. And the purpose of this method that Jesus gives is because it provides value to the person. The confrontation, it's a way that's meant to come from a place of love and caring for the person that's involved. It's wanting to see their well-being through all of it. It's a balance of truth and grace, and it's with the ultimate aim to be repentance and reconciliation and restoration. You see, integrity requires more than just identifying somebody's faults. There's wisdom in how we handle information. And in Joseph's situation, this may have been his only recourse, because we know the relationship amongst the brothers, the rivalry, and the things that already pre-exist there. But while he was prioritizing his relationship with his father, he was neglecting his relationship with his brothers. And that relationship was severely damaged. Whether he knew it or not, giving this report to his father leveraged the truth in order to elevate his own position within the family. And we're going to see that. Let's go to verse 3. Chapter 37, verse 3. "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him." So remember here that Jacob is also known as Israel. We talked about the whole situation where he wrestles with God and God gives him a new name, Israel. And for the rest of Genesis, you're going to see both names just kind of used interchangeably for him. When and why each name is chosen is a complete deep dive that I'm not going to get into today because I've got a whole chapter to get into. But there are varying opinions. I'm not going to get into it. It might come up later. But we know from covering Jacob that he lacked affirmation from his own father. His father openly loved his twin brother Esau over Jacob. And so Jacob, we see as he goes forward, he looks to Rachel as fulfillment for his life, for providing value to his life. So much so that he worked extra for his uncle just to have her as his wife. And then she died giving birth to her second son, Benjamin. And Joseph, her firstborn, he becomes Jacob's new obsession. He had found value in himself through Rachel, and now that she's gone, he will find it through Joseph, who came from her. And after Joseph leaves, you'll see that he does the same with her other son, Benjamin. Being the neglected child himself, he overcompensates by showering gifts and privilege upon Rachel's firstborn. I mean, how many times through this series in Genesis have we covered this idea of favoritism, among parents or even in a spousal relationship when, obviously we don't have the polygamy, but in that polygamy that we saw, we've studied this idea, talked about this idea of favoritism over and over and over again in the Patriarchs. And it's this recurring theme that informs us where things are headed. Again, it's a literary device to let us know that trouble's coming. And aside from the obvious things that we covered, I think there's another takeaway that we have here from that. And it's often one that we don't like to talk about. It's the idea that sin can be generational. And let me explain what I mean by that. It's the idea that habitual sins pass from one generation to the next generation. You may have heard of this referred to as a curse, but it's probably not the way that you think of curses. It's not, it's not like some gypsy puts a spell on your family and now every male in your family cheats on their wives. Like that's not how it works, right? Instead, it's the idea that no matter how much you want to reject it or no matter how much you try to be different, There will always be habits of your family that you grew up around that will follow you into adulthood. Sorry, teens, but that's coming. We typically do a good job of intentionally avoiding the obvious ones, right? I made a vow to always support my kids in all of their endeavors because I knew how it felt to have the opposite. And I never wanted to repeat that. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to be there for their events, their different things, to support them. But it's the habits that sneak up on you, that your own arrogance keeps you unaware of. I was proud. I was so proud to be involved in my kids' interests. And I ended up being completely blind, and I was completely blind to my apathy and my laziness in domestic chores or support of my wife. And I faced the harsh reality of who I had become. Despite trying to be the opposite in some areas, in others, I still became my dad. The way to break the cycle is through repentance. God breaks the chain by opening our eyes to sin and opening the door to repentance. And while I acknowledged and I turned away from those things and I repaired my marriage, things got deeper as I came to realize my unknown desire to gain my father's approval through achievement. And it's just like he likely did for his own father. And the awakening to this new sinful habit, it starts the cycle over again as God continues to shape me to understand, for me to understand better how I don't measure up, tears down this ego that I built up and this self-perception that I have of myself, and it shows me how he wants me to be. And this process, it's going to take my whole life on this earth to do, but it's worth it. It's worth it to do. And it's really a picture of the ultimate curse upon humanity. The curse of habitually going away from God that began with man's first realization that this was even an option in Eden. That human desire to choose us over God, it lives within all of us. But the cure is the same for all of us. To acknowledge that we cannot be right unless we surrender our will and our lives to him. And that though we carry the stain of failure and rejection, it was all washed away by the blood of Jesus. And so that all to submit to him and acknowledge this cleansing, they're deemed right with God regardless of what we've done. And those people who do that, they're called the children of God. And so God calls his children good. And then he trains up his children to be good. And this is that sanctification that we always talk about. I feel like it comes up every week, and it should. It should be something we talk about every week because it's an important part of our lives. All right, that's a lot. Let's move on. We have a lot to cover. We've done like 4 verses. This robe that he's been given, it's called a richly ordained robe. And richly ordained, it might mean fancy. It might mean many colors or technicolor. Some of you got that reference. One of the ways this could be translated is as a long tunic. And we kind of glean this from the only other time that the Hebrew phrase for this ordained robe is used in the Bible. It's used when describing the garment worn by David's daughter Tamar. And this story at its heart is a retelling of the Joseph story, really, if you really dig into it. And we're not going to get the details of it. It's kind of dark. I covered it back when we did our study through David. But in the story of Tamar, it's a robe worn by a virgin. And it covers all the way down to the base of the hand. And it covers all the way down to the feet for the virgin. And all the dads said amen. But not just a virgin, but virgin royalty. Being worn by Joseph means that it was at least at this time, unisex, right? And clearly it displayed status because it's richly ordained. It's a garment for someone who is set apart. So think of it this way. If you walked into a modern day construction site and you see a bunch of guys over here wearing jeans and shirts with the sleeves rolled up and work boots, and you look over here and you see a bunch of guys and they're wearing business suits. What conclusions are you going to draw about each group, right? Who's doing the work? Who's running things versus who's doing the work? Who has what position in there? Now imagine if you walked into a field and you saw a bunch of shepherds and they're wearing tunics that are girded, wrapped up in a way that they can move better, and they have short sleeves on. And then there's one guy wearing this fancy, ornate robe. What conclusions would you draw there? It's a very special and expensive garment, because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's quite clear that Jacob has adorned his 11th born son as the firstborn. He's treating him as if he is the firstborn. And we see in verse 4, his brothers hate him. It says in verse 4, when his brothers saw him or saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. They're bothered by the attention that he is receiving. Have you ever been jealous before? It's one of those sins that we rarely admit. It's easily fueled by our materialistic society that we live in. Jealousy comes when something you have is threatened by an outside party. See, I'm a middle child, and I have all the stereotypical middle child hang-ups. My brother is the oldest. He always got the attention. He received the most praise. He got the more expensive toys. My parents would actually even go to his sporting events. I played rec baseball. I wrestled 2 years in high school. All of that, my parents came to one baseball game out of all of that. And it was the last one of the year. That was it. Probably because they didn't give me a ride home because the coach took us out for ice cream. Maybe that's why they came. I don't know. But meanwhile, I remember sitting through nights like we've had the last few days, freezing in the bleachers with my mom watching my brother play football. I also have a little sister, and my little sister was the first girl born on my dad's side in like 2 generations. So she got so much attention all the time. And of course, she could get away with anything because she was a girl. And if you have a sister, you know what I'm talking about. If you're a guy and you have a sister, you know what I'm talking about. And while I was certainly jealous of the attention that my siblings got, I can only remember one time where I actually acted out on that jealousy. And I remember we were driving in the car, and my brother's 3 years older than me, and I remember there was a time where if my parents bought like a toy, action figure or something, they would buy one for each of us, and we both got the same one. And I remember at one point, it started to get to a place where they would kind of buy the one specific to us. And my brother had the Jedi Luke Skywalker, which at the time, if you have a Luke Skywalker, he's all black, he's got the green lightsaber, it's like so cool. I didn't get that. I mean, he had the Luke Skywalker, I didn't. And I remember we were fighting and arguing in the car, where my mom's driving down the highway, we're arguing in the backseat, and I don't remember what we were fighting over. And I was so mad, I grabbed Luke Skywalker and I chucked him out the window. I'm sure my brother has still not forgiven me for that. But I did look it up. It caused me to look it up. It's only selling for like $30 anyway, so it's not like he lost anything huge. But thinking about this idea of jealousy, you guys know I love House Hunters, but I like watching House Hunters because I like watching the couple dynamics in it, right? But my absolute favorite show, and Jen and I's favorite show, is Frasier. And the original Frasier, don't ignore the new one that came out, that's terrible. But the original Frasier, the 11 seasons, we have watched it through many, many times, and there is so many little great one-off jokes in there, and one of my favorite ones in it is Frasier and his brother. The show was so much about their rivalry with each other, and it's their dad's birthday. And they're trying to they set a limit on how much each of them can spend for dad's birthday, and they start pushing limit. They keep trying to go over and over and over, and they find out like, oh, he got him this, so I have to give him this, and they keep going back and forth on who can get him the best present. And there's one point where Frasier walks in to his apartment and just head down, and he says, I've tried, but no matter what I do, his brother's name is Niles. He says, no matter what I do, the gift that I get for dad will never be as good as Niles. And their housekeeper says, well, what did Niles get him? He says, I don't know. And I just love that joke. It's such a great joke. I had to throw that in for Carl. Carl told me he's a big Frasier fan, and I wanted to put that in, and he reminded me this morning that I forgot to put that in. But it just shows that rivalry, right? That rivalry that can exist when you are jealous for someone's attention. And while my brother and I, we often fought, and we fought a lot, so much my parents fought us boxing gloves, but we do love each other. Right, we still have that relationship. But the brothers in this Genesis story, their jealousy has turned to flat-out hatred. The rivalry of their mothers has certainly carried over to their sons. And while there's likely animosity between the sons of Leah and the sons of the other concubines, they find a common enemy in Joseph. And he's proved himself to be an antagonizer to everyone. Okay, now let's go on. I promise we're going to start moving a little faster. Verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? and they hated him all the more because of his dreams and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he told his father as well as his brothers. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And so here in this moment, we see more immaturity from Joseph. And when you factor in the relationship that he has with his dad, along with the robe that he's been given and the symbolism that's been surrounding it, telling the dreams to them this way shows a level of insensitivity. And whether or not his intention is to agonize, he must be aware of the tense nature of their relationship. And even when they lash out after hearing the first dream, he tells them later about the second dream, which is even more grandiose. I mean, the second dream literally places him at the center of the universe. And he goads his brothers so bad, even Jacob, there it is. He goads his brothers so bad, even Jacob has to step in and rebuke him. Because really the dreams are a major insult. Why is it insulting? Because the younger always bows to the older in this culture, right? Children are meant to bow to their parents, teens. Children are meant to bow to their parents. Siblings are meant to bow to the oldest sibling, who is the firstborn, the oldest male. The oldest male firstborn, and we've covered this at length, but a quick refresher, firstborn gets a double portion of the inheritance. The firstborn male becomes the lead of the family when the father can no longer lead. Jacob has already flaunted this idea that Joseph holds a special place with this robe and the treatment that he receives. And now Joseph himself is having dreams of being put in the position to lead. And we see three different reactions to the dream. First reaction is Joseph's. He's clearly excited about the interpretation of the dreams. It's clear that he believes that they are going to come true. And he sees himself as the beneficiary of these promises. And it goes to his head. It inflates his own view of himself, and it just feeds into his immaturity. And the other brothers, the other sons, they see it as an affront. They can't get past their history with Joseph, his immaturity, their dad's favoritism, and then, of course, their inter-family rivalry, and they immediately see it as malicious. This must be malicious coming from Joseph. And their relationship with Joseph is so sour at this point that they would reject the dreams even if they were prophetic dreams. They were just going to reject them instantly because they came from Joseph. Jacob has a very different approach to the dreams. We saw in verse 11, it says, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Jacob decides to chew on it a little bit. He wants to use proper discernment to understand what might be going on here. As a man who himself has received divine revelation from God through a dream, he doesn't want to completely discount what might be at stake here. And it's a good takeaway for us. In times when we're faced with difficult people or situations, we often feel very quick to provide an emotional response when we've been wronged. But it's often good to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and use some discernment. There's a chance that God might be doing something behind the scenes here. All right, verse 12. I promise we're going to start going faster. Verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. And then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. So a quick pause. If you recall, Shechem is the city that Levi and Simeon ambushed, and they massacred all the men in the city. We talked about that a few chapters ago. Jacob gets everybody out of Dodge out of fear of retaliation, but he still owns land there. And now he's gotten word that his sons are actually going to go take the sheep to go graze on that land. And he's worried. He's still worried about that retaliation. So he sends his favorite informant to find out what's going on. Verse 15. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? And he replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks? They've moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them near Dothan. But when they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Take a quick pause there. Their jealousy has grown into a full-fledged murder plot. Killing Joseph solves so many of their problems. Killing him destroys the dreams, so that's not going to happen. And killing him ensures that he will not be the firstborn. And so these cisterns that they're talking about, they're these deep holes that are carved into stone. They're used to collect rainwater at that time, collect and to store it. They've been found all over Jerusalem. They range from about 6 feet to about 20 feet deep. They're considered architectural marvels for their time. The brothers' plan is to kill Joseph and throw him into an empty cistern so the body isn't immediately found. And then they're going to tell everybody that he was eaten by a ferocious animal. That's the plan. But things are going to change. Verse 21, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue them from their hands. He tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let us not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So we see Reuben, he speaks up. He commands them not to kill Joseph, but rather just throw him in the cistern and let him die there. So Reuben uses his position as the oldest to change the course of action. Being the oldest, he naturally has that position as the leader amongst them. But he doesn't tell them his true motive. He plans to actually go back later, pull Joseph out of the cistern, and take him back home to their father. He's looking to deceive his brothers. And it's a common thing we've seen in the story of Jacob, right? This deceit continues to another generation. We saw it in Rebekah, we saw it in Laban, we saw it in Jacob, we saw it in Rachel, we saw it in Levi and Simeon, and now we see it in Reuben. Just constantly going through. It's one of those habitual family habits. And clearly he knew his position only carried so much weight with his brothers. I mean, technically he lost the firstborn right a couple chapters ago when he sinned against his father. That's in chapter 35 if you want to look it up. So he couldn't convince them to do nothing. So he had to trick them so that he could save Joseph's life. Let's see how it plays out. Verse 23. "So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. And they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat their meal. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, 'What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.' His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, 'The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?'" So they go through with the improvised plan. And I believe that while Joseph knew that his brothers hated him, he was clearly oblivious to the idea that they would actually harm him in any way. And like any teenager, he thought he was invincible, right? And of course, being spoiled probably didn't help. But they strip him of his robe and they throw him into the cistern. And then they have lunch. No remorse. Their story was going to be that an animal devoured him, and then we see these men who attack their brother like animals sitting down to eat. Genesis 42 tells us that Joseph actually pleaded with his brothers through the whole ordeal, and they just ignored him. What's interesting here is that Reuben goes off somewhere. It's likely that he wasn't at the lunch. Maybe he's on sheep duty at the time while they're all eating. And while they're eating, these Ishmaelites pass down the road. You guys remember Ishmael? He was Abraham's first son that he had with Hagar out of sin. And so the Ishmaelites, their grandfather's brother's family, so they're cousins, right? These are cousins. It's technically family. And they decide to profit off their plan and sell Joseph as a slave. Because if they do that, it still destroys the dream. Joseph gets to live, maybe, get some goodwill with the cousins. Everybody gets paid. I mean, everybody wins, right? It's kind of a nice little way to end off the day. So the cousins head on their way, the brothers head on their way. And then Reuben comes back to free Joseph, and he's not there. And he believes Joseph to have been killed, and he exclaims, "Where can I turn now?" And he says this because this happened on his watch. How can he explain to his father what he allowed his brothers to do? You don't need to worry. They've got a plan. Verse 31. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until my son is in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph to Egypt, in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So they cover up the crime with the blood of a goat. More deception, we see. And we see Jacob, who deceived his own father by slaughtering a goat to steal the birthright. He's now deceived by his sons, who slaughter a goat in order to steal back the birthright. We go through this story, and it's this tragic ending to close this chapter. This is not a happy story. It does not go well. It's a tale of boasting, of jealousy, of plotting, and of deceit. Who's missing in this chapter? We just read the whole thing. We read all but one verse, but somebody's missing in this chapter. God isn't actually mentioned in this chapter. It's actually pretty rare for Genesis. I mean, you think Genesis, you think it's all about God. He's not in this chapter. And while we don't see God, we see some really interesting coincidences happen. His brothers were supposed to be in Shechem, but they change their plans and they go to Dothan. Some random guy overhears this and actually pays attention. And then Joseph, while he's out looking for his brothers, just happens to run into this stranger. The stranger just happens to know who Joseph is looking for and tells him where to go. Then they plot to kill him, and Reuben just happens to be around to save Joseph's life so that he's not killed. They throw him in the cistern that just happens to be empty at this time. Then they're eating lunch, and the Ishmaelites just happen to pass by while they're eating. Also, Reuben just happens to not be around at this point because he had a whole plan. He's not going to let them sell. His plan is to get Joseph home. He's not going to let them sell him, but he just happens to not be around. And the Ishmaelites just happen to be going to Egypt. That's a lot of coincidences. You guys might say, no, it's not. Those are just the facts of the story. But they are coincidences. Why? Why is this relevant? Because we as the reader, we sit in a very special position to understand that if these things did not happen the way that they happened, Joseph is either going to be killed or he lives and he goes home. Well, we want him to go home, right? No, we don't. We don't want him to go home. Because if Joseph goes home, everybody dies. I know that sounds a little dramatic, but it's true. Everybody dies. Why? Because a few years down the road, a great famine is going to come. And there would be no reason for the Pharaoh of Egypt to have mercy on this random family from Canaan to save them. And as we continue these next few weeks through the story and we close out the book of Genesis, we're going to see Joseph get saved from his pride. We're going to see the brothers saved from their anger and their wickedness. We're going to see all of humanity saved from sin. Why? Because the promised Messiah that was going to go through Abraham and through Isaac and through Jacob is going to come through Joseph's little brother Benjamin. So if there's a famine in the land and Benjamin's one of the younger people, he's less likely to survive the famine. It's going to wipe out millions of people. And so this story of Joseph's life is one that teaches us about the providence of God. The God of the Bible, he is the creator of heaven and earth. But he's not distant and he's not uninterested in our lives. He is a father, he's a loving father who is a continuous and active participant in his creation. He has goals he intends to see accomplished within his creation, and he's guiding the events to meet that end. It doesn't mean that he overrides human will. He lets us have our will, but he does work outcomes for his purposes. So when you find yourself in a helpless situation, when it seems that nothing is going right and that God has abandoned you, know that he hasn't. I know many believers who can look back through events in their life, both the good and the bad, and you see this series of coincidences that just happen to come together, and it creates this miraculous outcome. And they can see where God had his hands all over the whole story. It's brought me to a place of recognizing the coincidences, and I ponder on them like Jacob to see where God may have been working. And I've come to a place where I almost don't even believe in coincidences anymore. If something's a coincidence, I kind of take a step back like, what's going on here? Something's going on. So I promised you guys, I made a promise, that we've been talking through the book of Genesis, and we've been talking about how there was a melody through Genesis, and it's not necessarily shown through here because this is just a whole lot of failure and decreation part of it, but there is a melody. Yeah, this is it here. The constant thing that we go through is it starts with new creation, goes to the creation, to the failure, and then a decreation, and then God creates a new creation. We are living in the failure and decreation moment right now, very clearly in this story. But I promise it will get better as we go through. But as we talk about this, and we talk about the melodies in Genesis, you guys know I often quote song lyrics. And so I said, for this series through Genesis, I'm going to try to quote a song lyric through every teaching that I do. And this one was a tough one, but I found one. I found one that works for this. And I had to dig a little bit. This is a song by DMX. Some of you guys are familiar with Darkman X, right? He was a rapper in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was known for kind of doing party anthems kind of things. You guys have heard the songs, even if you don't know that you've heard them. But he, like I said, he's known for kind of these anthems, but when you really dig into kind of like the deeper tracks in his albums, they can get very dark and very personal and very, it's almost like a psychological profile could be done. And while the man himself definitely dealt with some demons that ultimately cost him his life, it's interesting to kind of look back through and see what was going on in some of them. And one of my favorite DMX songs is called The Convo, short for conversation. And the entire song is a conversation between him and God and the realization of God's role in his life. And this is how the song closes. It says, I've looked the wrong way. I've done some wrong things. I've kept a bad attitude, but that's what wrong brings. And now you mean to tell me that after all this time, it was you that kept this dog from going out of his mind? It was you that breathed life into my lungs when I was born. And it was you that let me know what was right from what was wrong. And it was you that let me do what I knew could be done. And it was you who gave me a good wife and a beautiful son. And it's been you speaking to me inside my mind. And it's been you who has forgiven time after time. And it was you who opened my eyes so I could see. It was you who shined your light on me. See, guys, God is there. He always has been. But you don't see it when you're in it. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. And I've told you guys this story before, but it's such an amazing one. Talk about God doing miraculous things. There was one time when I was wanting to read my Bible. It went on for like a week of I want to start something new. I want to read something new, but I don't know what. Praying about it. God, show me what. Didn't get any answer. Literally took my Bible and went, boom, like that. Opened up to Ecclesiastes 7. I was like, oh, I've never read Ecclesiastes. Let's just see what this says. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. If you look at my Bible, there's so many notes now in that section of Ecclesiastes 7. It's such a great chapter. In Ecclesiastes 7 in verse 8, there was a section here. I find myself quoting it often now. In Ecclesiastes 7:8, it says, the end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, right? It's always better when you get to the end of it. But why? Why doesn't God just snap his fingers and make it all better? There's just something about humanity that requires us to experience suffering in order to be made new. Just being told to be better, I don't know why it's not enough. We have to go through it. And Ecclesiastes 7 has an answer for that too. In verse 2, It says it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. See, guys, the promise of God is not that bad things won't happen. The promise of God is that he will never leave us during the struggle, and that ultimately he is the one who is in control. And I have one final point before we close, and I'm feeling we're going to hit this hard over the next few weeks, but because we're starting out Joseph, I want to mention it. Joseph's dreams were from God, but they weren't necessarily about him. Think about his second dream, back in verse 9. He says, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And I don't have a slide for this, but in Genesis chapter 1, in verse 14, it says, And God said, Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light to the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. So the person in that dream would rule over the day and the night. The dream was about Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. And really, all of Joseph's life is actually going to point to Jesus, to this coming Messiah. Jesus would go out to live out what was known as a type of Jesus, or a type of the coming Messiah. He's one who's ordained and he's proclaimed to be great and to rule the world. But then he's stripped and he's put into the earth. But then he comes back to those who mourned his death, before ultimately being returned to a high place and actually being in a place of rule. And doing so, it opens the door for repentance and for reconciliation, and ultimately culminating in salvation. See, this story of Joseph, it is this great epic of the Hebrew Bible. And so I hope these last few weeks are just really interesting and a great blessing. And keep that mindset, keep that idea of this picture of, it's not going to be an exact one-to-one, but keep this picture of Joseph's life kind of forecasting Jesus' life and who the Messiah would be. All right, I've talked enough. Let's go ahead and pray, and we can get into our table talks. Lord, I thank you for today. I thank you for this space. I thank you for this opportunity that we can all come together, Lord, that we can represent your church, Lord, that we can come together as a community to worship, to study, to commune with each other, to talk through your word, to think about these things, Lord, to chew on these ideas and to think about them and how they apply to our lives. Lord, I want to pray for anybody who's going through any difficult situation right now that seems like there's no way out. Lord, I pray for comfort for them. I pray for those who have come through a difficult situation, that they can be a comfort for those who are going through it now. Lord, please be with us as we go through this week, and be with us in our table talks now. In your name, amen.